Hence I am called Hermes, Trismegistus, having the three parts of the philosophy of the whole world: the crescent of soul, the circle of spirit, the cross of matter. We began our sacred astronomy study with the most important planet, the planet you chose, Earth, Gaia, the Lady of the Lake, the planet at the center of it all, whose primary motion, the diurnal or daily motion, spin west to east, brings us the apparent motion of the heavens, from the east to the west, the rise, the reach, the rest, and the roots, which when looking south moves what we've come to call clockwise. Earth's glyph is the cross of matter inside the circle of spirit. Matter is formed by the ground, the horizon, and the meridian line, a great circle running through the cardinal directions north and south and reflecting the spin axis of Earth, the spine of Gaia. The blue circle shown here is the celestial equator. It is Earth's equator projected into the heavens, and it is the plane of Earth's primary, diurnal, spin, motion. The plane of matter, Earth. Because Earth spins west to east, this plane, this circle of matter, always runs through the cardinal directions east and west. But it is not the circle of spirit. If it were, the midheaven on our quadrant chart wheels would not do this. As Earth spins throughout the day, we see the midheaven and the IC moving from the left to the right on a quadrant chart wheel, which is confusing because truly the reach and the roots are always aligned to the meridian and therefore to the cardinal directions south and north. Rather, it is the ascendant and descendant that shifts and slips from the cardinal directions east and west, but we cannot show this on a two-dimensional page or screen. We only see the movement of iakos, an ancient Greek word for the ascendant, which means rudder, when we learn to connect the chart and the sky. Earth, the cross of matter inside the circle of spirit. The cross is the horizon and meridian. The circle of matter is the plane of Earth's primary, diurnal, daily, spin, motion. The cross of matter and the circle of matter are always fixed to Earth's cardinal directions. This is not so for the circle of spirit. The circle of spirit is the plane of Earth's secondary, annual, orbital, zodiacal motion. The Earth's orbital plane about the Sun is called the ecliptic. This is the circle of spirit. It is the plane of the secondary, annual, orbital, zodiacal motion. If we extend this plane towards infinity, we encounter the constellations of the zodiac. So as Earth revolves about the Sun during the course of a year, the light will always be between the Earth and one of these constellational star groups. Of course, we cannot see them because the light is so bright, but we can learn sky techniques that will help us know exactly which constellation and which sign holds the Sun at any given time. A wonderful embodiment practice is to put a light in the middle of your room and to orbit it. So unlike the embodiment practice that we utilized for rise, reach, rest, and root, where we spun counterclockwise for northern hemispherians or clockwise for southern hemispherians, here we're going to walk about the light in the same direction, counterclockwise for northern hemisphere, clockwise for southern hemisphere. Don't spin, keep your eyes on the light, and as you orbit the sun in the middle of your room, note how it shifts through the background that surrounds it. Perhaps set up 12 icons evenly spaced about the circumference of your room, so that as you walk between them and your model of the sun in the middle, you can witness the sun moving through the signs. The celestial equator, the circle of matter, the plane of Earth's primary, diurnal, daily spin motion, is not parallel to the ecliptic, the circle of spirit, the plane of Earth's secondary, annual, orbital, zodiacal motion. If we look to the zenith or straight above at the equator, we'll find that this angular separation between celestial equator, circle of matter, and ecliptic, circle of spirit, is 23.5 degrees, really 23.4, which is the tilt angle of Earth's spin, primary motion, in respect to Earth's orbit, secondary motion. And it brings such important phenomena as the circle of spirit ascending and descending the meridian during the course of a day. So the reach and the roots are not always at the same height or altitude. If we look towards the rise, we'll notice Iacchos, rudder. The celestial equator, because it is the plane of Earth's spin, is always fixed to the cardinal directions. At the rise, due east. At the rest, due west. But this is not so for the circle of spirit, the ecliptic plane. Rather, we get this snaking motion at the descendant, and we'll look back to the ascendant or the rise in the east. Now, the 2 times a day when the ecliptic does rise due east is when the tropical 0 Aries and 0 Libra points, the equinox points, rise. Whereas the maximum declination, the furthest the ascendant, the intersection of the ecliptic and the horizon or the ground, the maximum declination is the tropical solstice points. The equinox points have a declination of 0. They are aligned to the celestial equator. It's where the circle of spirit and the circle of matter meet. And this is why we define our tropical zodiac there. Maximum declination to the north would be 0 Cancer, or to the south would be 0 Capricorn. And those are where the circle of spirit, the ecliptic, is most distant from the circle of matter, the celestial equator. We'll also speak about azimuth as a separation from due east, due west. And azimuth increases as we increase our latitude from the equator. This is 48 degrees north latitude, and the ascendant can be much further from due east than it can be at the equator. At the equator, it maxes out 23.5 degrees north or south of due east. And as you distance yourself from the equator, that separation from the cardinal directions and azimuth increases. I know this can get confusing, especially when we're watching space quickly moving and these strange technical terms like declination and azimuth. So we'll head back into the lab and put our feet on the ground and remember how we experience this in everyday life here on Earth. Salutations from space and aloha from Earth, everyone. So stoked you're here. Did you get all that? I mean, this stuff can be pretty confusing, right? Terms like altitude and declination and azimuth. That's what we're going to get into today, and to really look at this boat of the soul and the idea of Iacchos, of the rudder. So I'll post that bit that we just watched on our webpage So you can review just that and kind of maybe watch it a few times. Just like any proper space mission, we built a lot of redundancies in here, you know? So I'm, again, just so glad that you've chosen to take the journey into sacred astronomy for astrologers, where we can learn to renature our starry study, something that I feel helps us tune into the proofs inside of the equations we use, or the vocabulary and grammar of our astrological language. Again, I feel that astrology is so much more than some symbolic language, but rather is the poetic breath of nature. And nature, of course, extends far beyond Earth to the planets and stars. Okay, well, there's been a lot of material posted on our webpage. I decided last week's lesson wasn't solid enough, so I went and cleaned up and added a bunch of stuff. And I totally understand if you feel you're not keeping up. If you saw the live lesson 1 or watched the different parts that were recorded, you're totally on point. And of course, all of this is posted, right? So you can stay on track with the course as we're presenting live, or you can take your own time. A lot of the imperative callings of the human experience, especially in our crazy culture, is to learn how to escape the tendencies of the rat race and tune into the grace of Earth's pace. That might be more alive right now with a significant Capricorn stellium happening than it is otherwise. So thanks again for your presence and your patience, in the immortal words of the big Lebowski. If you're into that whole brevity trip, that thing doesn't necessarily apply to me, and I'm really focused on presenting this material in a way that I hope is at a pace that you can integrate it. And you know, I could just put all of this information in very short clips or still images, but it doesn't anchor in. And as I'll say again and again and again, you can do so much here in the lab, but until you get out to the field, away from the small screen and out into the big screen, we won't really integrate this, and it can take a lifetime. All right, so let's head into the lab and look at some images together. Yeah, I think that's all I have for the logistics for now. So let me share my screen, and we will head over here. Okay. Last time we went to church, right? And we observed this photo that I took in Mexico of the sun at the reach. This vesica door of the church is facing due north, and so I'm looking due south at the church, and it's in the northern hemisphere. Really, this church in Mexico is between the tropics, which is a special consideration. But I took this picture in February, and that means that even in the tropics north of the equator, where this photo was taken, the sun reaches due south. And so at exact midday, solar noon, or local apparent solar noon, the sun due south is on the cross. But throughout the course of the year, the sun will rise and increase in height at the reach, beckoning you into the doors here. And there's some amazing things that happen that I think are very true to the Hermetic, Gnostic mysteries, the magical mysteries, that in so many ways were cast aside by cats like the church. But we, of the mystery fold, seem to infiltrate, because so many of the mysteries are held in these spaces. You know, I just realized that I'm holding Papa Smurf in my hand. So I wanted to say something about the homework or home play presentation that was, or assignment that was presented in the video there, right? So last week we did the Papa Smurf to reflect the primary motion or the diurnal or spin motion, right? So this is primary motion, yeah? Earth spinning west to east, so we notice the heavens rising in the east and resting in the west, day and night. And so last week, to simulate this, like Papa Smurf, the assignment was to reach the arms out to the side and with a light in front of you to slowly spin in the northern hemisphere counterclockwise, in the southern hemisphere clockwise, and with the head directly facing forward. Then for the northern hemisphere over the right arm, that is the time of sunset, roots, sunrise, and reach. Yeah. So sunrise is over the left arm if we're spinning counterclockwise to simulate the primary motion in the northern hemisphere. And sunset is over the right arm. All right. Because the southern hemisphere is taking the same rotation west to east down here, if we go down under or up over, depending on where you are, that means that the primary motion west to east will look clockwise. And so sunset's going to be over the left arm, roots, rise will be over the right arm, reach, okay? So that's doing the Papa Smurf according to the primary motion, the diurnal spin motion of Earth. The secondary motion is Earth's orbit of the light, right? So Earth tilted, our spin axis, our primary motion is tilted in respect to the orbital motion. If it weren't, the celestial equator, Earth's spin, and the ecliptic, Earth's orbit, would be parallel, but they are not because of that, all right? Earth always North Pole leaning towards the north, towards Polaris, pole star. So Papa Smurf exercise for this week, home play embodiment exercise, is to simulate this, okay? So you're going to be the Earth orbiting sun. You'll put a light in the middle of the room and Papa Smurf is gonna walk around it. Northern hemispherians walk counterclockwise, just like we spun counterclockwise for the primary motion. Southern hemispherians walk clockwise. And instead of spinning here, the game is to keep your eye on the light. And so what you'll notice as you do is that your sun is going to move through the backdrop, right? That's like the constellational stars, star patterns, the zodiacal groups, right? So if Papa Smurf in this exercise is over here, then the sun is in the constellation U, and when he gets here, the sun is in the constellation me. I'm glad we can connect in that way. These simple exercises can open profound portals for integrating this information. And I hope you've had a chance to draw a meridian line on your Earth, on land near your home. It's something we'll utilize again and again. I posted a technique video on our webpage of how to see the midheaven in space with your face. Please watch that one if you have not. And it's totally linked first to having drawn a meridian line. Because the midheaven, though there's much dispute about what the midheaven actually is, the midheaven on a quadrant chart like Porphyry, Placidus, Regiomontanus, Campanus, etc., is always tied to the cardinal directions. Due south in the northern hemisphere, due north in the southern hemisphere. And it can go either way between the tropics. Things get really strange there as far as communicating this information of sacred astronomy for astrologers, but I'll do the best that I can do. All right, so you please do the Papa Smurf. Primary, rise, reach, rest, root, and orbital secondary, sun through the zodiac. All right, and back to the show. We'll probably come back to this place later on or another time. I learned a lot of the mysteries engaging with this church. And last time we spoke about this one, the Vatican, with this obelisk borrowed, I believe, from Heliopolis in Egypt, and how it works like a sundial, right? We looked at how the sun rising in the east and reaching in the west, and because this is northern hemisphere and above the Tropic of Cancer, where the sun always reaches due south, right? That movement of sun, because Earth is moving counterclockwise, west to east, that movement of sun, moon, Jupiter, heavens is east to west and culminating due south for northern hemispherians above the Tropic of Cancer. We talked also how, because the west to east motion in the southern hemisphere below the Tropic of Capricorn is clockwise, the sun there will rise in the east and reach due north, resting in the west. So the shadow here on the ground keeps time, keeps the hours, right? When the sun is due south, the shadow will project due north. So as the sun moves counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere, clockwise, we used to call this sunwise in the northern hemispherian sky, right? Reaching in the south, resting in the west. The shadow at rise is directed west or west-ish, and also moves sunwise or clockwise through due north at midday and to the east or east-ish at sunset. All right, this is how they're keeping the hours of the day at the Vatican using this obelisk, but they're also keeping the days themselves. One way we could do this is by utilizing altitude. We all know this, right? The sun is at its highest height at summer solstice time. That means the shortest shadow, by the way, and at its lowest depth at winter solstice time, the longest shadow. I've often wondered if natives here utilized totem poles, at least sometimes, to track the climb and descent of the sun during the course of the year. So the idea would be, like if I want to use this totem, for example, if I'm standing due north so that the totem is south of me, then I'm going to see the midday sun at the reach somewhere on this obelisk. Yeah, like this. So a totem, I would imagine, instead of having, eagle at the top for our craft, would in the northern hemisphere have Cancer or Gemini at the top. Okay, 0 degrees Cancer in the tropical zodiac, summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, right? So that's the height of the light during the course of the year. And 0 degrees Capricorn or winter solstice, right? The depth of the light, the lowest the noon light shines from. And in between the equinoxes. So this is altitude, right? Simply the height of the light at midday. We could speak about the altitude of different stars in so many ways, but the idea of altitude is that the horizon is 0 and the zenith is 90 degrees, Okay. So let's say this was a summer solstice sun that I'm looking at here at the top of this obelisk. Well, from there, at summer solstice, the sun begins descending at the meridian, at the midheaven, throughout the days. So from Cancer, we would descend to Leo, then to Virgo, bringing us to equinox, 0 degrees Libra, where we continue falling, you see, Scorpio, Sagittarius. The last minute of Sagittarius is winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, right? Where Sagittarius becomes Capricorn. And then, like a goat, we climb from Capricorn to Aquarius, Pisces, equinox time, right? The middle height, Aries, Taurus, Gemini. And so here's a term that you may have found your way to in your astrological study. It's called Antiscia. Antiscia is shown here, that in this idea of altitude expression throughout the year, we have a highest sign to house the light. But it's actually 2 signs, right? The last degree of Gemini, tropical Gemini, becoming the first degree of tropical Cancer is in the northern hemisphere, summer solstice. So that climb in Gemini becomes the descent in Cancer. Yeah. And Antiscia shows how these signs, Gemini, Cancer, Taurus, Leo, Aries, Virgo, Pisces, Libra, Aquarius, Scorpio, Capricorn, Sagittarius, are related in this way. Now, if we want to bring it down to degree measure, dig how 20 degrees tropical Gemini would be Antiscia to 10 degrees tropical Cancer. 25 degrees tropical Cancer, 5 degrees tropical Gemini. 15 degrees tropical Leo, 15 degrees tropical Taurus. 7 degrees tropical Virgo, 23 degrees tropical Aries. Does that make sense? Antiscia. And some say that energetically, there's a shadow relationship. And this course, as you know, is not about correspondences or delineation of charts, but just feel into this truth that the signs have different energies, right, in altitude. And that comes through in the seasonal expressions, right? So many say that our tropical zodiac is seasonal. And I question that because, well, this Antiscia pole is true for the northern hemisphere, where we rise in the east and reach in the south, rest in the west, root in the north. We know it goes the other way around in the southern hemisphere. And that the rise, reach, rest, root actually move in a counterclockwise fashion, reaching in the north. Well, if you're at the equator and you gaze at the constellations of the zodiac, if you're looking south versus north, this is hard to describe in words, you'll find that they move in a different order. I should save this for when I bring Stellarium up and we can look at this. But let me just say that some of you I know witnessed me in the southern hemisphere facing south and bending over backwards towards the north where the reach is, just so that I could see the zodiac constellations the way that I'm used to seeing them. Because from the northern hemisphere perspective, once we learn these star patterns, if you get down to the southern hemisphere, you're looking to an opposite side of the sky, and therefore they're flipped, what I would consider upside down from my experience. It's a total trip, okay? So this Antiscia pole in the northern hemisphere, where Gemini becoming Cancer is summer solstice, and Sagittarius becoming Capricorn is winter solstice, has to be flipped in the southern hemisphere. When we're looking north, in the southern hemisphere, we would sit we would sit south of the obelisk and watch the sun climb and descend at the midheaven, which is due north, right? And so the signs are flipped, as we know the seasons are as well. So in the southern hemisphere, where tropical Sagittarius becomes tropical Capricorn, it's summer solstice, yeah? And this goat climbs down, right? And tropical Gemini becoming tropical Cancer is winter solstice. So given that the tropical zodiac works for natives born in either hemisphere, that's somebody born in early November time is going to show expressions of a Scorpio sun, regardless whether that means the middle of the fall, northern hemisphere, or the middle of the spring, southern hemisphere, means that our zodiac or our tropical astrology is not seasonal. I mean, we can say, and I think this is very important, that the signs on the opposite side of the wheel of life are really two sides of one thing. My favorite example, represented at least in half by Libra Smurf here, is that Libra and Aries, put them together, it spells libraries. This is the book of relationship. Libra, othership. Aries, selfness. Not selfish, selfness. And we need to balance othership and selfness to meet in the middle way of right relationship. So a really wonderful game to play, all of my astrology students do this, is to tell me what is the one thing defined by Sagittarius and Capricorn, Sagittarius and Gemini, Cancer and Capricorn, right? Taurus and Scorpio, the signs on the opposite side of the wheel of life. And if we can tap into that one essence of the middle way, then the zodiac presents itself to us in beauty. And this is one beautiful thing about the seasonal opposition of northern and southern hemisphere. It brings us to the middle way, right? Where one side experiences summer, the other side experiences winter. And where one side is experienced very high altitude at the time of zero Capricorn, the other side, the northern hemisphere, is experienced very low altitude. And for the same latitudes from the equator, north and south, the altitude of the midday sun, let's say it's high in northern hemisphere and low in southern hemisphere, those two altitudes are going to come and meet in the middle place. So Vatican is northern hemisphere, yeah, and above the Tropic of Cancer at that. So we do have this sunwise movement being clockwise from the rise in the east to the reach due south to the rest in the west. And we could sit here in the north and watch the sun climb and descend during the course of the year on the solar pole, but that'd be a tricky thing to do. Be a great thing to do. I've built some things like this and they're effective, but more effective and easier to see because the sun is so bright. More effective is to work, instead of with the light, to work with the shadow. And this is how it's done at the Vatican. So this line is a meridian line, right? How could we create a meridian line? When the sun is at the reach, at the midheaven, halfway between sunrise and sunset, our shadow is going to be cast the other way. So the midday shadow in the northern hemisphere with the sun due south runs due north. And the midday shadow in the southern hemisphere, when the sun at midday is due north, runs due south. Either way, we get a meridian line. Between the tropics, it can actually go either way, but unless it's one of the 2 days a year where there's no shadows because the sun culminates directly overhead, every other day and everywhere on earth, the shadow at midday runs on a meridian line, runs north-south or south-north. So once we have our meridian line on the ground, the Vatican has this incredible one here. When the shadow hits the line during the course of the day, we know the sun's at the midheaven. We know it's solar noon, midday. So here we're looking north, right, at midday. You see the shadow on the meridian line. So we've got our back to that obelisk and we're looking at its shadow, a very short shadow at this time. Why? Because it's around summer solstice. So you can see this plaque here, right? Solstice in Cancer, 22nd of June. So that means either the last degrees of Gemini or the first degrees of Scorpio. So just like we saw with the sun climbing the obelisk, we can watch the projection of the sun as its shadow and see Antisha. So the shortest shadow is the last degree of tropical Gemini in the northern hemisphere and the first degree of tropical Cancer. And then it's going to get longer from there, right? 20 degrees Cancer up here will be Antisha too, or equal to 10 degrees Gemini. Antisha actually comes from a Greek root for shadow. And they're not only tracking the solstices or the equinoxes at the Vatican, but look at that, right? Pisces, 19 February, Scorpio, 23 October. They're literally using an obelisk to track the sun's movement by looking at the shadow. They're tracking the sun's movement through the zodiacal signs of the tropical zodiac. And these signs are not Antisha, but when the shadow this way, shortening, gets to the plaque, Pisces begins. As we're climbing, the sun's climbing right towards summertime in northern hemisphere. Here, when in spring, am I tripping? I am. I'm just noticing that Pisces actually should be up here because the shadow is getting shorter as we move to Aries. And Scorpio should be down here because the shadow is getting longer as we fall to winter time. So I'll have to correct that. But either way, these signs are not Antisha one another. Scorpio is Antisha Aquarius. Pisces is Antisha Libra. Scorpio is leaving from equinox time, and Aquarius is on the way there. The equinox plaque would be down here if I had mapped this correctly. Regardless, Pope loves astrology. Antisha is a really cool thing to look at. Yeah, it relates signs that aren't necessarily said to be related by aspect according to the Hellenistic or Ptolemaic aspects, for example. And obelisks, which brings us to this, the boat of the soul. It said that the netters, which we might refer to as gods and goddesses, but the real idea of them is principles of nature, and therefore they're inside all of us. But it said that these netters, which we might consider deities, all came to earth on these celestial boats. Well, we here on earth too maybe came in that way. And our charts, our natal charts, show this boat, which has a rudder, the Iacos. This is how that's spelled, and I was told that's pronounced Iacos. All right, so many in the Hellenistic, like Project Hindsight, translations will say that the ascendant in this word means helm, and it's often spoken of then as the steersman, because the ascendant is where the first house begins, and many see the first house as me, right? But they didn't have wheels like this on the boats back in the day, like what I would consider helm when I hear that word. I also think about helmet, which is interesting with the first house, right? But rather, you steered the boat with a rudder. And so it is with the ascendant on the chart. And this brings us into azimuth. All right, so here's one way that we see the sun dance during the course of the year is to look at the height of the light at midday, highest at summer solstice, lowest at winter solstice, right? The higher the light, the longer the day. Another way that ancients all over the world kept the days was by utilizing what we call azimuth. And while altitude is vertical expression, 0 at the horizon, 90 directly above, azimuth is a horizontal expression. And the system, the standard is that due north is 0 degrees azimuth, due east is 90 degrees, due south 180 degrees, due west 270 degrees. And if you watch, and this is just a wonderful practice, if you can watch the rise throughout the course of the year, you'll see that the sun only rises due east on 2 days. Those are equinox times, right? In the tropical zodiac, 0 Aries and 0 Libra. And then the sun dances on the horizon by azimuth. So altitude shows this climbing and descending of the light, and azimuth shows this horizontal motion. So at March equinox time, 0 tropical Aries, the sun rises due east and sets due west, and then starts moving north. Now this is true for Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere alike. And I think this is a very important thing that shows us that our zodiac is not seasonal, but rather is a result of the same thing the seasons are a result of, and that is the directions, the medicine wheel. Everywhere on Earth, after 0 Aries time, when the sun rises due east and sets due west, as we move through the degrees of the Aries sign, tropical, the sun rises further north of east every day and sets further north of west every day. So the azimuth at sunrise, say it's 10 degrees north of east, it's also going to be 10 degrees north of west when it sets. So we move from Aries towards the north to Taurus and then to Gemini, bringing us way out there. And by the way, these aren't equally spaced on the horizon, nor are the climb and descent of altitude equally spaced on a solar pole or the shadow, for example. So if you saw those plaques on the meridian line at the Vatican as we're tracking through the signs of the tropical zodiac, you'll notice that they're not equidistant from one another. Why? Well, either way, heading north of due east for the signs of Northern Hemisphere spring or Southern Hemisphere fall, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, we find our way to solstice time. Solstice, which means the stopping of the sun. And here's an alignment at Stonehenge that kept the days by tracking sunrise at the time of summer solstice. There's winter solstice alignments as well there. The sun stops. Stops what? And the answer is it stops moving north. And it hangs out at its northern extreme on the rise and on the rest for a few days' time, and then starts heading back south. Northern movement, turning around, southern movement. If I was to say that this is one of the glyphs of the tropical zodiac, what is it? Can you see that there? The Cancer glyph, the sun's dance on our horizons, moving south and moving north, stopping at the northern extreme at June solstice and heading back to the southern extreme at December solstice. Bill Nye loves astrology too. And last time we looked at my suggestions that the only 2 glyphs with horizontal lines, Pisces and Libra, represent horizon time, and especially when the sun is at 0 declination. And that is equinox, Pisces becoming Aries, Virgo becoming Libra. So the last degree of Gemini brings us to solstice. Sun stops, turns around, and Cancer coming back home, coming back to the cardinal directions of the medicine wheel. And again, we see Antiscia this way on the horizon. So all signs have altitude and all signs have azimuth. You could literally build a structure that watches the sun's dance on the rise in the east, from the north to the south, and on the rest in the west, from the north to the south, and put markers for the different signs. Now your marker for Gemini would be the same as it is for Cancer. Gemini bringing us as far out, as far away from the cardinal directions as possible. Crazy trickster Gemini, and Cancer bringing us back home. After Cancer, Leo, Virgo, which is Antiscia Aries. But just as Aries is springing away, Virgo is bringing us back to balance. September equinox, the last degree of tropical Virgo becoming the first degree of tropical Libra. And then in the northern hemisphere, the sun falling, increases that rate. But northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere alike, moving south of due east on the rise, and the rest from Libra to Scorpio to the sign of the adventure, travel, Sagittarius, tropical Sagittarius in its last degree takes us to the furthest south rise of due east and rest of due west. Tropical Sagittarius, that last degree, which becomes the first degree of Capricorn, and we see Antiscia once again. And that furthest south rise, furthest southwest in the northern hemisphere sky, marks also what at midday the lowest sun, December solstice. So it's a low arc and it's a short time of the sun above the horizon. Whereas in the southern hemisphere, that same time, rising as far south of due east, setting as far south of due west, but culminating in the north on the other side of the sky, marks the longest day, the longest travel of the sun from rise to rest. Capricorn, like Cancer on the other side, brings us home. So Capricorn, Aquarius, which is Antiscia Scorpio, and Pisces, which is Antiscia Libra. So that shadow marking at the Vatican was marking this point right here. 0 degrees Pisces, which is 29, 59, 59 Aquarius, is the same Antiscia as 0 degrees Scorpio, and 29, 59, 59 Libra. See? Antiscia, shadow play. So sacred sites all around the world. I mean, you can look at Newgrange in Ireland, which has a December solstice alignment when the light of the sun makes its way down the so-called passage grave, and only on that day is low enough to illuminate a plaque in the back. Chichen Itza, where the equinox sunrise causes the steps on one side of the pyramid of Kukulkan to project onto another side the image of a serpent snaking its way down. Stonehenge, many alignments, Avebury, basically every stone circle ever built, tracking the sun's movement by azimuth on the horizon to keep the days. This is the site I found my way to on Maui. It's called Oluwalu. And it's a petroglyph site. I was there on my birthday some years ago. And I got there a little late to see the petroglyphs and was a little bummed about that. But right when we were walking up to the site, moon rose over this horizon. This false horizon, right? Because it's not 0 degrees altitude. It's a large stone. And the moon in this moment just happened to be ingressing from the last degrees of tropical Pisces to the first degrees of tropical Aries. That's due east. Now the moon does some other things, and we're going to be getting into that. But what happened is when the moon rose over this false horizon, I saw the principal pattern of petroglyphs lit up. And I realized in that moment that this was a solar calendar, and a very genius one. And this was before I knew that around the world, many of the ancients utilized false horizons to keep the days. Here in Maui, if you were able to see the eastern horizon, you really actually can't, because Haleakala, the house of the sun, gigantic volcano, is there. So you can't track this azimuthal movement on the horizon. Now you can watch the sun climb and descend on the mountain during the course of the year. But a false horizon like this is genius because you create, or in this case, it would seem creator creates, a flat surface so you can watch the sun's movement. Now the sun's not rising on the false horizon at sunrise, right? It's already been up. So one genius thing about this is you can work this site on Hawaii time, and depending on how close you are to the stone, it's going to change the time of local apparent sunrise on this false horizon. Just like you've probably experienced this, you can watch the sunset and you can climb a hill and see it still setting, right? In this case, you could watch the sunrise, you could get closer to the wall, to the false horizon, and you can see it rise again. So I'm still trying to figure out at this site how far to be from the stone to keep the days. I have been back for an equinox, and I took this picture then, and this is this principal area of glyphs that are everywhere, but they're really concentrated here. And I confirmed that the equinox sun rose right above them, illuminating them from above. And so I'll go back for solstices, and I think that when I do, I'll see the sun rise as far north of due east at summer solstice time over there on that notch, and at winter solstice time over there. So if I go back at summer solstice, I can find the right distance to be from the stone to see sunrise in this notch here. And then I'll have to go back at winter solstice to confirm that the sun is there and prove this theory that I have, that this is a site that keeps the days in this way. You could build one, especially if at home you have a view of the rise or the rest unobstructed. You can build a site that tracks the azimuth, the sun dance on the horizon. Yeah, the north to south movement from June to December, and south to north from December solstice to June solstice. Perhaps you have a false horizon you could use near you. Or perhaps like I do here in Seattle, though not from my home, where we have a western view with the Olympic Mountains there. I like to call it Mount Olympus. I can see where the sun is setting throughout the course of the year into different notches of the Olympic Mountains. And I can learn, oh, wow, there's where the equinox sun sets. And that's going to be true for 0 Aries tropical, up here's vernal or March equinox, and 0 Libra tropical, right? Fall equinox. And just watch it move throughout the course of the day. And if I'm watching from the same place, that's the key to this thing, I can keep the days. All right. And this is a blue slide for some reason. Blue, reminding us to take a moment to get into our heart, for that's where the art of the chart starts. Not only in our own, but in the Lady of the Lake, as I've come to call our home, Earth, the water planet. And I believe the zodiac emanates from Earth's heart, from the center of our planet. doesn't come towards her. I'll show you why a couple lessons down the road. This is the chart for lesson 2, start time. 4:30 p.m. today, January 17th, 2018 in Seattle, Washington, where I am, with the 26th degree of Cancer on the rise. That's the sacred hoop. And on the other side, sun setting, as we can see. So I don't need to look at the planets to speak about what I want to share here in regards to Iacos, the rudder. And we'll bring the earth, the medicine wheel, into the center here, which, as I showed last time, for where I live in Seattle, should align this way, right? This is a meridian line from Seattle drawn towards the north. In the northern hemisphere, like Seattle, above the Tropic of Cancer, the IC is always due north. The midheaven is always due south. Well, what's the problem there? I'm pointing vertically, and yet the midheaven on this chart wheel shown over here, right? Why does the medicine wheel not align to the midheaven and the IC? We do see that the ascendant descendant is on the horizon, yeah? But for some reason, the midheaven is shifted to the right of vertical. The IC is shifted to the left of vertical in the chart wheel. What's going on here? This point, 90 degrees from the ascendant descendant, is called the nonagesimal, right? If you know equal sign houses, which would start 25, 29 Cancer here on the ascendant. Well, the second house cusp would be 25, 29 Leo, 25, 29 Virgo, etc. Every house is equally 30 degrees, beginning with the zodiacal degree of the ascendant. And in the equal sign chart, the cusp of the 9th and 10th is the nonagesimal, 90 degrees from ascendant, descendant. So we have cardinal signs rising and setting. What would that be? It would be 25 degrees, 29 minutes, Aries, right? Why is that not the midheaven? What's going on here? Well, the chart is the sky. And here we see the sky at this time cast in Seattle, 4:30 p.m., January 17th. And we're looking at what? We're looking at the cross of matter, the meridian, the horizon, and this blue curve here, the celestial equator, the circle of matter. Let's bring in the circle of spirit, the ecliptic, the zodiac. Where is the ascendant? Way over here, way north of east. Remember, as we were watching the signs move on the horizon by azimuth, Cancer is furthest north of east, Gemini and Cancer. So this isn't even the extreme because it's 25, 26 degrees Cancer rising, not 0. Yeah. But you can just see there that the ascendant, unlike what is often taught to us, is not east. It's east-ish, but here in Seattle, rather far north of east. And because the descendant always opposite, that brings the descendant where the circle of spirit, the ecliptic, intersects the horizon on the western side. That brings the descendant south of west. So at this time, a northeast ascendant, a southwest descendant. Bringing the constellational patterns to show that the circle of spirit, where the sun lives, and for the most part the planets, because for the most part our solar system is relatively flat. We'll look more into that later down the course of this course. But that's where the constellations of the zodiac, goat, water bearer, fish, ram, bull, twins, live. Not on this plane, not on the circle of matter, right? Circle of matter goes through some really cool groups, going through the so-called lucky stars here in the water bearer. This is Aquila, the eagle. Look at Orion's belt. Orion's belt rises due east and due west because Mintaka, this belt star, has 0 degrees declination. It's on the celestial equator. But the celestial equator, circle of matter, where the ecliptic, secondary motion, orbital motion, zodiacal motion is the circle of spirit. How do we draw the sun? Circumpunct, right? Circle of spirit with that interesting dot in the center, which I would suggest is source. And that's a topic for another time. So it is the circle of spirit, the place where the sun lives, the zodiac, the orbital plane that the cross of matter is within. But you don't always get a perfect plus cross. This one I would call a righty, and we'll get into that at the end of the lesson today. Some more points. There's a 0 Aries point, where in so many ways we begin our tropical zodiac. Why there? It is one of 2 places where the circle of matter, the celestial equator, and the circle of spirit, the ecliptic, cross. The connection of diurnal, day, and annual, year, matter and spirit. So you can see, I think, the genius of the tropical zodiac in that way. You can see also, right, how does this move? From the east to the west, culminating at the midheaven due south for northern hemisphere, above the Tropic of Cancer, as Seattle certainly is. So you can see here that the 0 Aries degree has already culminated, has already reached the midheaven. So if I know how to see that in space with my face, I would see that the midheaven was maybe 2-3 degrees Aries at this time. And so it is 2 degrees 45 minutes Aries. Okay. The midheaven. So that's the midheaven, where the circle of spirit, the ecliptic, the zodiac, intersects the meridian, the spine of Gaia, our north-south line, or great circle. So if you watch the training video of how to see the midheaven in the space, you'll see that we work with our meridian line. We have to learn the constellations, the stars of the ecliptic, so we can learn to see the ecliptic in the sky. But in the northern hemisphere, if I'm facing due south and I know those stars and I can tell you the midheaven, I'm getting better at it, usually within 3 or 5 degrees. But notice a few things here, all right? Very importantly, that's not the highest part of the circle of spirit at this time, is it? I mean, over there towards the north, the ecliptic is way higher than it is at the midheaven at this time. Midheaven around the Aries equinox point is the middle altitude, right? So how is the ecliptic so much higher over here? And very importantly, because we're going to have to learn to use this point to see the ascendant and the descendant, right? 12th house, hidden things. We don't usually get to see what star is rising in that moment, your rising star, right? We're going to learn to work with the area of the reach, the south, but not due south. We're going to learn to work with the nonagesimal to determine the ascendant and descendant. Because the nonagesimal, which is the highest part of the ecliptic at any given time, is always 90 degrees from the rest and the rise. So strange here to see the midheaven tilted from the vertical when the midheaven is actually always at the meridian. In fact, it's the one cardinal direction of the ecliptic that you can see at night, right? Where for northern hemispheres, where it's north, I mean, down under the ground, right? The IC. And the ecliptic intersecting the horizon here south of west and north of east will not show us those cardinal directions, right? But the nonagesimal, if we can learn to see this, and it's very difficult to do. If you've ever worked with me outside, you know I'm always doing this, trying to trace my hand through the ecliptic star so I can feel into where the plane is and then feel where the height is. And so it looks like it's right here, but that's also a little unfair because I'm looking due south. I have to change my perspective to find that height of the ecliptic plane, the non-adjustable. And if I can, then just working with this place of the sky, if I know its zodiacal degree, well, I can simply add a square to get to the ascendant, subtract a square to get to the descendant. So I'm learning to see what's on the rise and rest by working with this height of the ecliptic curve, the circle of spirit. It's a difficult thing to do, getting better at that one. I'm usually within 3 degrees here because the meridian line is very easy to work with, but it's hard to find the top of the curve. So this is really important. Some people teach the midheaven is directly above you. That's very, very wrong. It can be right. Well, it is right twice a day, only for locations between the tropics. People teach the midheaven is the highest part of the ecliptic at a given time. And you can see right here, that's very wrong. It's not right. It's right twice a day when the equinox degrees are rising or setting everywhere. What is the midheaven then? It's actually, in a sense, about time, because this point that's at the midheaven right now is exactly halfway between when it rose and when it will rest. So the timing right between rise and rest is reach for sun, for moon, for Jupiter, for Pegasus, for Cetus, whatever it may be. This star has been really calling me lately. So a timing thing halfway between rise and rest, but also an altitude thing, because though this isn't as the height of the ecliptic at the time, it is the highest altitude that that point on the circle of spirit will reach. Okay, so we're gonna head back into Stellarium and play with this a little bit. We'll first take a break, but I want to read this from Dorian Geisler Greenbaum's The Daimon in Hellenistic Astrology. In astrology, the hour marker ascendant is called Iacchos, rudder of the chart by which the native's fate is turned. It zodiacally represents the time and place where the child comes into being, manifest in the physical world, and thus subject to some kind of fate. Most of the lots whose very name prompts connection with one's allotment or fate project from the same ascendant. Iacchos, rudder, which steers the boat of the soul. I'm not sure if you've looked at the so-called Arabic lots or parts, like the part of fortune, but many of them are measured from the Iacchos, from the ascendant, from the hour marker.